I grew up in this, very strangely international house that involves international names, and even my brothers give me strange names. She just proceeded to say, I cannot call you that name. You are a walking spawn of Satan. You're evil. You should be begging Jesus for forgiveness. How could you be
What?
walking around with that name? Well, I rocked up the interview. They thought, okay, we're really confused. What is your name? And I had a bit of a Madonna moment. I thought, okay, I can reinvent myself.
Love that. Gesu Antonio Baez is an international politics advisor and public affairs consultant based in London. He's the chief political advisor at Pax Tecum Global Consultancy, a firm focused on helping businesses engage with local governments to promote their business, which leads to greater social impact. As a foreign affairs expert, he's appeared on multiple media outlets and given high-profile talks commenting on global events. Born in New York City, he currently splits his time between London and Italy. In today's episode, we explore the evolution of Gesu's name, the different names he's called by, and experiences of corporate America. Names are enriched with meaning, a part of one's identity, and hold such importance. Welcome to That's My Name. I'm Maya Mitsuko September Welford. What's your name?
My name is Gesu Antonio Baez.
Thank you so much, Gesu, for being on the podcast today. How do you introduce yourself to others?
It's interesting. It really depends where I find myself. I mean, obviously, I go by my name that I have, which is Gesu Antonio or Gesu. But I find that if I'm with my fellow Italians, I have to knock off the Gesu and just introduce myself as Antonio because computer doesn't compute with that name, with Gesu, which I'm happy to explain.
Yeah, definitely. Please do. So with your Italian friends, you go by Antonio. I'd love to hear more about why that is.
Yeah, so I think even before I go into that, I think I'd have to explain like a bit about who I am.
Yeah.
So my background is so my father is from the Dominican Republic, and my mother is from Italy, from Genoa, so that any Genovese listening can be proud. So but I was born in New York City, so I have a very exotic, strange name, particularly three times because Gesu means Jesus, and actually on my birth certificate it actually is Jesus Anthony, but with time it just evolved to Gesu Antonio instead. So Jesus, while it's very common in Hispanic naming culture, it's so in the Dominican Republic it's super common. In fact, I'm named after my uncle on my father's side, whose name was Jesus Antonio, Jesus Anthony. In Italy, this is unheard of, and in fact, I'm the only Jesus in the Italian registry with this
Wow.
name. I've discovered.
Okay.
Really proud of that fact.
Yeah.
So when I introduce in fact, I barely introduce myself as Gesu, but when that happens, when let's say I have friends who are much more open-minded, or family members who are open-minded, say this is Gesu, the computer just doesn't compute with my compatriots, so immediately it's just Antonio, or even beyond that. I have very close friends of mine who are extremely open-minded. Everything they just can't bring it. It's like it's as if let's say my name was Buddha and people will have difficulties calling me Buddha, for
Mm,
example. It's that notion. It's like they
okay.
just can't do it.
Mm. So I guess what I'm hearing is the ties to kind of Christianity, and obviously Jesus or Jesus is a very big prominent character within Christianity. So do you think that's kind of why, even though some of the friends are really open-minded, they still can't quite get their head around that
It's
name?
Yes, and it does deal with that reverence because even the friends who can't say it. I mean, this is not just friends, but even in professional settings in Italy, it's even more difficult. But it has to do a lot with exactly with the reverence of the name Jesus. The reason why it's so common, let's say in Portuguese and in Spanish culture, is because obviously, there was the Moors that took over Spain for almost 1,000 years, and Muhammad was very common. So
Mm,
once Queen Isabella came in 1492 and said, enough of that, and made everybody Catholic, if your name was Muhammad, your baptismal name suddenly became Jesus or Jesus.
Oh, wow.
So that's where the legacy came, and obviously
Mm.
Italy or France and other Catholic countries, they didn't have that the way the Iberian Peninsula did, which of course carried over to Latin America and the Philippines and wherever the Spanish Empire touched. So Italy still has high reverence for that. I think the only equivalent would be Salvatore, which means
Hmm.
savior. Um, but not Jesus. That one, even you could be the most complete atheist in Italy, as one of my cousins is. I mean, she's completely atheist, and even she still gives a little giggle, and she finds it a bit awkward. And she's my cousin.
Mm-hmm. And then how about your mother then? You mentioned your father's from the Dominican Republic and your mother's from Italy. So your mother's Italian. How
Yeah.
how does she call you?
Well, there we go. So this and that comes to a funny story, actually, even how I became named. So my both my parents, everybody calls me different names. My brothers call me different names.
Mm.
Everyone. So my mother calls me Jay.
Okay.
But my family in Italy calls me between Gesu and Antonio, and then my father calls me Jesucito. So it gets much more
Okay.
complex.
Yeah.
But I mean, my mother clearly. So the reason how I even got my name, because even it was difficult for her to accept it. My parents got married in the Dominican Republic,
Mm.
and but they met in New York City. And when my mother went to meet with her brother-in-law, aka my uncle, Jesus Anthony. He had a different nickname, and so she was casually speaking with him, and he asked her, Maria, my mom's name is Maria. He says, Maria, would it be possible if you ever had a son, you can name him after me because I've only had daughters, and it's been my personal wish to name them after me. And my mother, she's quite feminist, so she doesn't buy into the whole,
Yeah.
you know, that notion. She's like, well, why don't you just give him the female version of your name? He's like, no, that's really impossible for mine. So she said, well, what's your real name? And then he busts out with Jesus Antonio, and she didn't get it until she
Yeah.
realized Jesus, and she thought, "Oh my God, we don't do this in Italy. This is sacrilege. I can't
Yeah.
do this." So she insisted on trying to call me, Antonio Jesus instead. Like Jesus would be a middle name, but my name would be Antonio. But my mother is also extremely superstitious and extremely religious, and apart from being from Genoa in the north of Italy, her origins are from the south, which is very superstitious. So
Okay.
she had this dream that she gave birth to like a five-headed baby,
Oh my God.
and it was like diabolic. So she thought it was a sign from God that he was offended that she was gonna call me Antonio Jesus. So when I was born, because she couldn't say Jesus because there's that H sound and Italians can't do it, they just said he's a New Yorker baby. We'll say the English, so Jesus Anthony, and
Mm.
there I am.
Wow, that's yeah. The dream, the part about the dream is like yeah, really really interesting. But nevertheless, she still went ahead and named you after your uncle. So are you quite close with your uncle? Do you see him often?
Well, he passed away about 5 years
Oh.
ago. I'm very close to
Mm.
obviously my cousins and their because they're significantly older than me. I would for me, and I was always the apple of his eye because I was, his name bearer. And I always think of him very fondly. I like to think that he watches over me. Um,
Yeah, definitely. Oh, that's nice. And you mentioned everyone calls you a different name. So your mother calls you Jay, your father calls you Jesucito. Does this get confusing or is it quite nice?
it's so natural. In fact, to me, I feel a bit like a dog, which is recognized by certain names. So I can identify who who's calling me based on these
Mm,
names. So I'm just so used to it. I grew up in this, very strangely international house that involves international names, and even my brothers give me strange names. So it's just common. It's normal
mm,
for me.
hmm. And I know that you've had experience within corporate America. I'd
Yeah.
love to hear about how your name may have kind of influenced your experiences there.
Well, exactly, and it actually did lead to, why I have the Italianized version of my name. So as I've mentioned, on the birth certificate, on the passport, it's Jesus Anthony. And I was born and bred in New York City. Well, between New York and Italy, I've lived life. But I'm a New Yorker through and through.
Mm.
And so, and even though I've been living in the UK now for about 10 years and everything, and abroad for a good almost 13, obviously my formative years were in the States, and I started my professional career in the States within marketing and sales. And of course, I was very proud of my name. And even starting with school, my mother, she just waltzed right into the school and said, "My son, his name is Jesus." And
Mm.
that was already,
Mm.
that was preparing me for corporate America already.
Okay.
But when I started working, fortunately, I had really good employers where they never cared about, how if that's my name, that's my name.
Yeah.
But it was colleagues and then clients that it started to get very weird. So the best example, the one that's there's a few that's two that stands out to me. One was I remember my first meeting. I mean, I was the definition of a hustler. I was really studying full time for my undergrad, and then I was working full time.
Wow.
Don't ask how that. I mean, and it was corporate America. Like I had an office
Wow.
job, and at the time, an email, which was a big deal for me,
Wow.
with a salary and bonuses and all this nonsense. And I'm sitting down at my first meeting, and I present myself. Hi, I'm Jesus Anthony, and this man proceeds to literally cackle, like absolutely cackle,
Wow.
and says, you really need to think about changing your name because it's really unprofessional to be called Jesus. And I was like, I was
What?
20 years old, and I don't know where I got the chutzpah, as we say in New York.
Mm.
I just became this very sage man, and I just said, well, if my name was Chongqing or whatever name, you'd have to say it anyways. It's unprofessional to not say it. And I was just very
Yeah.
adamant, and that put him in his place quick. But it
Wow.
actually, yeah, and it actually provoked, though, office discussion saying, well, maybe it's unprofessional having somebody with that name, which I thought,
What?
okay, I've been questioning my identity for many years.
Yeah.
My racial mixture has been, polemic for so long. Now my name, it's like, and this was starting to get to the whole, at that time, the whole song from the Ting Tings, "That's Not My Name" was coming up, and that was my soundtrack for a good while.
Wow, I'm just shocked. Like, how can a name be unprofessional or professional? Like, yeah, how can yeah, it just really, really baffles me. But it's, to be honest, I'm not surprised. I'm not, I've had guests on this podcast previously. I had a guest called Show, and actually his manager, he was doing sales, who's kind of doing calls to kind of cold calling, trying to do sales, and his manager was like, call yourself Sam when you speak to people. So I'm
What?
actually, yeah, not surprised, but it just really, really annoys me that people are like, your name's not professional. Like,
Oh,
what did I like come out of the womb and my mum was like, let me name her a really professional name, so when she's 20 she's not like discriminated against? Like, it's just a bit ridiculous, isn't it?
it's completely ridiculous, and it actually gets worse because another situation was, so in one point I was considered unprofessional, and the other I was considered to be basically the Antichrist
Okay.
because I had basically colleagues that were saying, well, when I introduced myself as, "Hi, my name is Jesus Anthony," or just Jesus, this woman who was extremely, I guess she was a very, very devout Christian, quote unquote.
Mm.
And she just proceeded to say, "I cannot call you that name. You are a walking spawn of Satan. You're evil. You should be begging Jesus for forgiveness. How could you be
What?
walking around with that name? Because every action you do is sinful. You cannot be." And she just continued to berate me. And I just looked at her like, "What
My.
is bat? Crazy."
Yeah. Wow.
So, yeah.
Oh. Wow. um yeah, that's just, I mean, yeah, wow. I don't really have many more words for that. And with this woman, did you have to work with her, or was this just like a one-off kind of encounter?
I had to work with her. That was the
Oh,
thing. And she
okay.
insisted that I didn't address myself as Jesus, and I ignored her. And then she brought it up to my director, and my director thought like, okay, why don't you go by Anthony? I told her this is ridiculous. I said this is absurd. I said with all due respect, because the where I was working was in the south of the United, it was in Florida, and fun fact, it's very common in the south of the United States for men to have the name Ashley.
Mm,
And I said flat out, like, well, we have a colleague named Ashley, and I'm sure everybody will think it's female, but it's not, it's a male.
mm,
I'm going to tell Ashley to change his name. So that kind of, this was the whole, before people were a lot more conscious about, cultures and all that jazz. So, but no, I had to deal with her, and it was very difficult. It exercised my diplomacy to the highest degree.
yeah, I bet. I bet. I think you probably developed a lot of kind of patience. Um,
More like hatred, but that's
yeah.
it.
Yeah, no, completely understandable. It is just quite ridiculous, really. Um, so I know that you now go by Gesu.
Mm.
Um, tell me about that. Why do you go by that name
That
now?
came out very randomly. I've always had Gesu almost as, back in the days of MySpace. I put that as my name because I thought,
Mm,
my last name is very Hispanic. It's very Spanish name Baez. And then, with the rest of my name, it was already very Hispanic, and I thought, well, it's not really reflecting the Italian side very much. So I just thought for fun, kicks and giggles, to do
mhm,
Gesu Antonio. And the thing is, my cousins in Italy, they do call me Gesù. They really do. I mean, it's mixed between Gesù and Antonio, but it's really they call me Gesù already. My friends called me Gesù already. Um, so I thought, well, why not? And then it was a MySpace, and then it evolved to an email, and it was while, and then fast forward, I left the United States, lived in Argentina very briefly, and then moved to Paris, lived in
mm,
Paris for a while. Then in the process between leaving where I was speaking on employment opportunities, because they saw my email, which had Jesu Antonio, then they thought that was my name, so they were confused by the CV. So when I went up for I rocked up the interview, they thought, okay, we're really confused. What is your name? And I had a
mm.
bit of a Madonna moment. I thought, okay, this I can reinvent myself.
Love that.
So I just like call me Jesu, and it just went on. And actually, it's been quite successful. It's just I haven't had
Mm.
any, chastisement since.
I love that. I really love that kind of Madonna moment.
It really
And so
was.
yeah, and do you think you'll stick with this kind of version of your name?
That's what my mother said, because she's really miffed by the fact that I go by Gesu Antonio. She's like, "Well, your name is so beautiful and exotic as it is, Jesus Anthony." I'm like, "Well, it's exotic in Italy, but not, not everywhere else." Yeah, I think I am. And the thing is, it's very different because even my significant other calls me, Antonio doesn't call me Gesu,
Mm,
and my name changes variably, but because I now have quite a profession, I have clout within in my field.
mm,
I'm a political advisor and on diplomacy and foreign affairs and in public affairs consultant as well within politics. So I've written articles, I've appeared on TED Talks, I go on TV, and everybody knows me as Gesu Antonio. So if I were to revert to Jesus Anthony, which would then bring on the whole, is it Jesus or is it Jesus? And then they don't know how to pronounce Jesus, and that's a pet peeve of mine. I think I'm going to be Jesu until the day I die. But on the
okay.
epitaph, they have to put Jesus.
Okay. um, and with you mentioned that you have kind of lived in quite a few different countries and experienced lots of different kind of countries and cultures. Um, have there been, and I know we've kind of touched on corporate America, but have there been any others where maybe you felt more accepted because of your names, or perhaps less accepted because of your names?
Funny enough, I think I feel the most. Well, obviously, even though my father's from Dominican Republic, I was never accepted for my name because again, Jesus is
Mm,
very Italian. Funny enough, it's in Spain where they see my last name, they're like, okay, you're Spanish, whatever. And actually, the Middle East, surprisingly enough, I feel the most accepted. Nobody questions it.
okay.
They find it so interesting. I've never had any such an easy experience than being in the and I can speak Arabic, so when I'm speaking,
Okay.
and they already see me, they because I have a very I guess Middle Eastern aesthetic, so they automatically assume I'm from the region, but then they realize I'm not, and they hear my name and they just find it lovely, like, oh, Jez
Mm,
Antonio. So I love being I love being, whether it's in Oman, whether it's in Sudan, whether it's in Morocco, just saying my name, and it's never a controversy. It's more the fact that how are you not Arab?
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. And actually, I was thinking as you were speaking about how you're going to stick with Gesu till the day you die. And actually, it reminded me of a recent episode that I did for kind of British tradition of women taking their husband's surname when they get married or deciding not to. And I've been having a few conversations about this, and someone actually said that actually, like, I've spent all this time and I've built kind of my personal brand and who I am with, my name before I got married. And actually, someone felt it quite difficult to change her name because then it's like her online presence was kind of different because now she's going by a new name and she felt like she kind of had lost that previous kind of, I guess it's identity, isn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, it definitely made me think of that.
Well, it's very true. It's very true, and that's the thing. And I think it in a way it actually renders my name, my actual real birth, name, far more intimate in a way, because yes, the world
Mm,
knows me as Gesu Antonio, and that is the exterior. But only those who intimately know me, so my significant other, my parents, my closest of friends, they know me not just by Jesus Anthony, but even in the proper Spanish pronunciation,
mm,
Jesus Anthony. So
mm-hmm.
it renders it a lot more intimate. So the public gets Gesu Antonio. I get Gesu Antonio for the sake of living in peace and no more, crazy, fanatics telling me I'm the devil. But it renders it much more intimate.
Mm-hmm. So what are you up to now and how can people get in touch?
Sure. Well, what I'm up to. I live in London. I have a consultancy firm here in London called Pax Tecum Global, and it focuses on public affairs, consultancy in politics, and also in political advisory and impact assessment for sustainable development. So we're all about the doing the good work. I have the consultancy firm, but then I also work a lot with political advisory for clients, especially in regards to what's happening in the world. And let's just say with the Ukraine-Russian crisis, I have been very busy
Mm,
as of late. And at the same token, I have a podcast too called the Global
yes.
Podcast, and updating that. And if I'm not traveling within the Middle East where I feel comfortable to say my name, I'm downloading an episode for that. So yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jizu, for sharing that with us.
No,
And thank you so much for being a guest today. I've really loved speaking with you and hearing all about your experiences with your name.
no worries. And if anybody's interested too in following with me, you can find me on Instagram where I rant more about my name. But I'll give that to you, so if that's even on a different name, so we don't want to confuse the people.
Yes, I will tag you when we post and I'll include your handles in the description as well.
There we go. Thank you so much for this. This has been fun.